We dive into a special edition of Mock Draft Monday where the Baltimore Ravens trade up. Next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is who covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we are back here. It is a new week of Ravens Talk Monday edition episode here, which means another Mock Draft Monday is in store for today. But we're not just going to be talking about mock drafts here today because the Ravens made some moves over the weekend that we have not discussed yet, and that is the signing of Josh Bynes and the signing of Calais Campbell. Well, like re-signings. They're coming back to the Ravens. Josh Bynes for his fourth stint in Baltimore, Calais Campbell for his second. We'll dive into those in the first segment, talk about what they mean, the deals that both got, and just where they fit in on this Baltimore defense. In the second segment, we'll look at the mock draft that I did for Mock Draft Sunday that I will read out today on Mock Draft Monday. And finally, we'll look at a few mock drafts from Twitter that we got under the post that I put out on Sunday. Again, so many mock drafts. Thank you so much for everybody who submitted those, and I'm going to be reading them as I see them out. And then if I didn't get to yours today, I apologize. I'll try to get to all of them throughout the rest of the week because draft season is almost at a close here for 2022. The draft coming up very soon, and soon we'll know who these guys are coming into Baltimore as rookies. So a ton to talk about here today. Before we dive into that, though, if you're here with us on YouTube, you can see my face in my background, in my haircut. My hair's being a little spiky today. I don't know why, but spikiness aside, we're here in video form on YouTube. Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. We put out daily Ravens content for all 5 of those days. I'm almost at 700 consecutive episodes here of Locked On Ravens, combining both audio and video, but we're also in audio form. Both shows are the same in audio and video. So if you are driving to work and you can't watch video, obviously on your way to work driving, be sure to follow us on anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. Tons of great content coming up, and tons of great content already happened. We had our Marcus Williams interview drop on Thursday. If you haven't checked that out, you can see him or listen to him and I talk on this show. We also had Kaji Ismail on. We have him on every Friday, and he's phenomenal. So be sure to give us a listen, give us a watch, give us a subscription, give us a follow, and anything. I really do greatly appreciate it. But let's dive into this content here, starting off with the signings of Calais Campbell and Josh Bynes. And let's start with Bynes. Bynes happened first. There had been a lot of discussions about how the Ravens were going to pivot from Bobby Wagner, right? And just where they were going to go with their inside linebacker room that has young guys like Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison and et cetera, but just it felt like they needed a veteran, especially after the impact that Bynes gave them last season. The Ravens decided to bring back Bynes on a 1-year deal. I haven't seen the specs of the contract yet. I'm assuming it's a veteran minimum or close to a veteran minimum. I'd be shocked if it was anything greatly over that. And on a veteran minimum deal, this is a phenomenal signing because Bynes had expressed interest in coming back to Baltimore. I had called him, if you've been with me for a while now, I have called him multiple times the savior of the Ravens defense in 2021. Now, how much of a title is that considering how bad the defense was in 2021 in some aspects? Fair point. But I think what Bynes brings to the table still is a willing tackler, someone who tackles well, is good in the run game, can give you some solid pass coverage snaps also. Has he lost a step from when he was 25, 26? Sure. I mean, he's up there in age now. I'm not saying he's this young, athletic, spry guy anymore, but the Ravens have those. They have Queen and Harrison and those guys. So to have a steady veteran presence who has seen a lot, who has won a Super Bowl championship, and who has success playing next to Patrick Queen already, we saw what that did for Queen and the ability for Bynes to feed off of Queen and Queen to feed off of Bynes, and that happened. Is Josh Bynes Bobby Wagner? No, he's not Bobby Wagner. Is he close to Bobby Wagner? No, he's not close to Bobby Wagner, but he gives you what the Ravens need. And I think for where the Ravens could have gone at the position. I mean, guys are still out there, right? Quan Alexander's still an option. There are a couple other veteran inside linebackers who, if the Ravens wanted to go the veteran route, they could have. But I don't think the Ravens, with their cap situation, if Alexander or another player, Alexander Johnson, some of the veteran guys wanted more than a veteran minimum, considering the Ravens also signed Campbell, it might not have matched up money-wise. And now with the Campbell signing, they probably do have to create some cap space, whether that is releasing Miles Boykin or Ben Powers or both, or restructures or extensions. We'll see what happens there. But for me, I think this is a good signing. It, again, is not the needle-moving signing that a Wagner would have been. But it's a solid veteran addition, or re-addition, I guess, when you look at it. They can play next to Patrick Queen. He's liked in the locker room. He loves this organization. And so, yeah, I think this is an A signing for me. I'm not saying that he's going to be this difference maker all in all, but I think he'll have a few difference making plays that will contribute. And you could easily have him start next to Patrick Queen if you still think Malik Harrison's not ready. Harrison's going to cross train at Sam linebacker. John Harbaugh did say so. That aspect of it is another thing where, if you want to play Harrison more at Sam while, let's say, Tyus Bowser recovers or something, you can have that option. I still think the Ravens will probably draft an inside linebacker in the draft in the middle rounds, or maybe sign an undrafted free agent to compete there. But at the same time, I think Bynes does give them something at that position, because he gave them a lot last season. And now moving on to Calais Campbell. Campbell was the bigger money deal of the two, signed a 2-year, $12.5 million contract, can go up to around, I believe, in the $16 million range. And the first year cap hit is only $3.56 million. So essentially what I'm assuming here is this is probably going to be more of a 1-year contract that you can stretch out into 2 if you want to, but the Ravens will be able to cut ties after a year if they feel like the production isn't matching what they invested, and vice versa. But Campbell on the field for Baltimore for these past 2 seasons has been, I'd say, not necessarily overly dominant, but a very solid player. Campbell commands a lot of double teams, and he has commanded double teams for the majority of his career. And I think that's value in itself, where it's not going to show up on the box score, right? You're not going to see box score Calais Campbell tackles, sacks, double teams, right? You're not going to see that. But I think what that does, and what I think a lot of people know, is that frees up teammates elsewhere. That gives the Ravens the ability to go out and have one-on-ones with talented pass rushers like Odafe Owe, or a rookie that they bring in, let's say, or maybe Michael Pierce. Who knows? They have a lot of options, Justin Madubuike, etc. So Campbell, not only can he rush the passer a little bit himself, he has shown that over the course of his career, maybe not so much over the past 2 years in Baltimore. I think that aspect of his game was a little underwhelming, but I don't think this is them signing some scrub to a 2-year deal. Calais Campbell's still a very good player. And part of the thing I want to touch on with Campbell right now is the fact that I think, again, if you were with me last offseason, we were talking about what is the ideal role for Calais Campbell? What would that be in 2021? And I had said, and I talked about it with guests as well, that really what you want out of him at this stage of his career, where he's not 27, 28 anymore, you want to have him in a limited snap role where he can still provide you value, keep him fresh for the majority of the year heading into the late regular season, what we hoped was the playoffs. It ended up not being that way, but I think that's what everybody wanted, or maybe not everybody, but most people wanted, not necessarily a 70-80% snap player, but someone who could play 50-60% of snaps throughout the entire year, not miss a game, and still provide that presence and still have a big role on the team. Just not we're going to throw you out there every down and just use up every ounce of energy, because at this point, I just don't think that's what's right for Campbell. Well, what happened in 2021? Campbell played by far the most snaps on the Ravens defensive line because of injuries and COVID absences, because guys were on the COVID list, and he had a couple of injury issues himself, but it ended up being not the role many envisioned for him. And I think so this year, if you can have the role that many envisioned in 2021 for him now in 2022, where he's not playing the most defensive line snaps on this team, you can keep him fresh in that role. I think that will benefit him. It will benefit the defense. It will benefit the team in general. And you'll see an overall, I think, uptick in pass rushing efficiency from Campbell, maybe in sacks. I'm hopeful that the new defensive scheme that Mike Macdonald implements will help out not just Campbell, but the guys around him pass rushing. We've talked about here how the Ravens pass rush has been very inconsistent over the past 4 seasons, which is when Don Martindale took over as defensive coordinator in Baltimore. The pressure rate, it's been there. It's been up and down, but the sack numbers, you'll have a game where they get 6 sacks, and then 2 games where they'll get none, and then another where they'll get 1. It's just They need more consistency. Campbell is a talented interior pass rusher. I just hope that he can show that in 2022, because that part, again, it's been underwhelming, but overall, off the field, he's a great leader. The team respects him. He seems to have loved his time in Baltimore, and the Ravens, according to Justina Anderson, were the most aggressive team in terms of getting things done. It was reported that the Colts, the Browns, and the Chiefs all had interest in him as well. But the Ravens get the deal done. 2 years, $12.5 million, again, up to around $16 million in total, and about a $3.56 million cap hit, as reported by multiple people out there, including Josh Rebeck of The Athletic. So, Bynes and Campbell back to Baltimore. We'll see what the Ravens' next moves are, if they make any, before the 2022 draft in just a couple weeks. But we'll head into our first break. I'm going to get back. We'll be diving into my mock draft that I did for Mock Draft Sunday that I'll read out here today on Mock Draft Monday. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a time to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. But first, let me tell you a bit about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. And now that March Madness is over, we can pivot now to the NBA playoffs. And my Denver Nuggets, they are the 6th seed. They'll be facing off against the Golden State Warriors. And if you want all the latest odds and props on that series or throughout the NBA playoffs as well for any different matchup, be sure to head over to BetOnline.net. They're your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Plus, the MLB starting up. The Orioles are in full swing right now. I know the results at this point haven't been amazing win-loss wise, but hopefully we'll see some young talent up there soon. So head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on a Monday. And before we get into our mock draft Monday content, I do want to say that the Locked On Podcast Network is having some great draft events. We're doing a ton of special things, so be sure to stay tuned for all of that, and be sure to tune in when everything does end up happening. You will not regret it. But here today, we're going to be diving into my mock draft that I did for my usual Mock Draft Sunday. I read out today on Mock Draft Monday, but this one is a special twist, and I usually save these mock drafts for the final month or 2 weeks or so, which is I do one mock draft where the Ravens trade up and another where the Ravens trade down. So this week, we're looking at the one where the Ravens trade up, and I know a lot of people are excited about the possibility, well, who could the Ravens trade up for? How far could the Ravens trade up? And so I used the Pro Football Focus mock draft simulator for this one and their trade aspect of their simulator, and it was great. It was really fun to use. I usually do the Draft Network. That's where I prefer, but Pro Football Focus has a good one themselves. So in next week's show, we'll do a trade down, but for the trade up scenario, I ended up going up to number 7, and I traded the 14th pick, the 76th pick, and the 139th pick, so a first, a third, and a fourth for the 7th overall selection, where I took Kayvon Thibodeaux, the pass rusher from the University of Oregon. Now, there's been a lot of, I don't want to call it controversy, but there have been debates about, is Thibodeaux going to fall? Is he going to go in the top 3? I think he's a top 3 talent. Like, I really, really do. There have been debates about his work ethic and does he really love the game? Well, I don't see any of that. I think he loves the game. I don't see work ethic issues. He's a very talented pass rusher, can convert power to speed, speed to power. I mean, this is a top flight guy who is uber athletic, has the size you want, has the athleticism you want out of a player like this. And for Thibodeaux, I think that when you're looking at the top flight pass rushers in this draft, it's Aiden Hutchinson, it's Kayvon Thibodeaux, it's Trayvon Walker, and it's Jermaine Johnson. Now, the likelier one of those 4 to fall to Baltimore at 14 is Jermaine Johnson, it feels like. But all 4 of those guys could go in the top 10. And for a player like Thibodeaux, who has the track record of success at Oregon, consistent success over 3 years there, I think that if you're going to make a play in a trade up, it has to be for a position of really big need, or the talent is just too big to pass up on. I think Thibodeaux is both. If Thibodeaux falls to 7, 8, 9, if I'm Eric DeCosta, if I'm this Ravens team, I am trading up in a heartbeat. And maybe it takes the package I did. Maybe it takes a little more. Am I trading a future first, future second? Future second seems more in that range that I'd be willing to trade. But we heard before how Eric DeCosta kind of had to sit there and didn't like having no second round pick as guys were flying off the board. But if it nets you a talent like Thibodeaux, another guy who has been slated to fall by some people because of a 40 time is Kyle Hamilton, who, if he starts falling, safety's not a need for the Ravens, but the talent is just too much, in my opinion, if he falls to that range. So I was happy with my trade up for Thibodeaux. I didn't expect him to fall in this one, and he ended up doing it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to stop this fall right here. Took Thibodeaux there, and I know a lot of people would like for the Ravens to do that. just not necessarily the expense of a ton of future draft capital. And I'm on that boat. I'd rather not trade a future first, a future second, and a trade up in the first round. But sometimes, especially if you're moving up into the top five, I don't expect them to do that. But if you're moving up into the top five, then you have that. But I think Thibodeau, for those three selections I mentioned, would be a great start for the Ravens. And then at pick 45, I still want defense. I picked Roger McCreary, the corner out of Auburn. Now, I've talked about McCreary before, so I won't get into too much detail here. But he is what you want in an outside corner. And with the Ravens now losing Tavon Young as well to the Chicago Bears, although he was cut, so it was pretty obvious he wasn't coming back. Anthony Averett to the Las Vegas Raiders, Chris Wesher to the Carolina Panthers. The Ravens need to invest in cornerback. And I think getting a player like McCreary in the second round is phenomenal value. And right in this range, you have guys like Kyler Gordon. And depending on what you classify Dax Till as, you could I think he's more of a hybrid player, but you could classify him as a corner if you want to, Jalen Petrie, etc. But I think McCreary, what he brings, he is tenacious. Ball skills are off the chart. He is able to stick to receivers. He mirrors routes like a wide receiver. As a lot of the corners in this class do, actually. I'm very impressed with this cornerback class. Very deep, as we'll talk about later in a couple minutes. But I think McCreary in the second round, like if you can pair a Thibodeau and McCreary as opposed to trading up for Derek Stingley and then picking like Nick Bonito in the second round or something, I would much rather have Thibodeau and McCreary. And just because I think the cornerback class is a little deeper than the edge class, not saying the edge class isn't deep, but I just think this cornerback class is like ridiculously deep. So I love the McCreary pick. And then at 100, because the Ravens didn't have 76 in the situation, I picked Rasheed Walker, the tackle out of Penn State. And I think I actually had the McCreary Walker duo in one of my previous mock drafts a couple weeks ago. But what Walker brings is a developmental player at tackle who doesn't necessarily have to start week one, but can if you need him to. You can start him at left tackle if you have to. I think, obviously, with Ronnie Stanley and his up-in-the-air situation right now, a contingency, and I think a smart one, would be for the Ravens to select the tackle on either day one or day two. Maybe early day three if there are better prospects at different positions. You don't want to reach for a guy. I get that. But at some point throughout this draft, the Ravens should take an offensive tackle. Morgan Moses, that's a great right tackle option. They have Juwan James as well. Great right tackle option. You can move him over, but I would rather have somebody in a Rasheed Walker or somebody in the draft who could make that transition and allow Moses to stay at right tackle, or James, whoever it is, to stay at right tackle. Because at this point, you can't approach this draft like you did last year for the Ravens, where there were no tackles taken by this team. It was Ben Cleveland on the offensive line, and then, all right, let's back it up and call it a day. That's what ended up happening. So the Ravens understand that. Eric DeCosta's talked about it. John Harbaugh's talked about it. And I think they are going to select the tackle. Walker can also be a developmental right tackle. So this isn't like, he's only a backup left tackle for the majority of his career. He can play right tackle and be developed there. And I think if you can do that, you can have Morgan Moses play for a year or two. And then all of a sudden, you can slot in Walker when he's ready and have that long-term option potentially. So I like Walker a lot. And then next at pick number 110, I took Zion McCollum, Sam Houston State cornerback. Now, this was a really close pick for me between Cam Taylor-Britt and Zion McCollum. I ended up going with McCollum, partially because I hadn't taken him before. I had taken Cam Taylor-Britt, I think, in my first mock draft, but I love what McCollum brings. And I talked about the stickiness of this cornerback class. He is one of those players. Now, the competition that McCollum has faced compared to what Taylor-Britt has faced or McCreary has faced, there's a drop-off for sure, but he was one of the most dominant players in his conference. I think that for the value where he is, the Ravens love their small school guys as well. They're not going to necessarily write off a guy because he didn't play in the Power 5. McCollum has the ball skills. He tracks the ball very, very well in the air. He is a willing tackler. And I think when you're looking at this Ravens team and how they tackled last season, yeah, you probably want some good tacklers in the draft this year. So a pretty defense-ish heavy draft in my first 4 picks. But the key here is for 2 corners. I think it's really important that the Ravens take 2 corners in this draft because they can sign a veteran in free agency, but I think that to have 2 developmental outside guys, because look, we don't know what Amon Marshall is right now. We haven't known for a while, ever since he was drafted. Brandon Stevens, Ardarius Washington, some slot hybrid guys who can play in the slot, play some safety. I have to look at those guys and say, well, where do we see them? But those guys aren't necessarily pure outside corner. Stevens can play a bit out there, but for Washington, that's more of a slot player. So if you can get a McCreary and a McCollum, or even if it's McCreary and Cam Taylor-Britt, or Kyler Gordon and Cam Taylor-Britt. I think second and fourth seems pretty good for a double dip at that position, in my opinion, because you're getting high-quality players, developmental, special teams guys, and for McCurry and McCollum in particular, you can play them both on the outside and play them at a very high level and kind of get back to the 3 cornerback rotations that the Ravens do love so much. And then at pick number 119, I took Matthew Butler, defensive lineman out of Tennessee. Now, I talked about Matthew Butler last week, so again, not going to talk too much about him this week, but I think the Ravens, they do still need defensive line depth even after signing Bynes and Campbell. Campbell is not the 10-year option for them, right? He's only going to be around for a couple more seasons, unfortunately, even though, if he could play at a high level, I'd love him for as long as he would be in Baltimore, but it's really only realistic he's going to be around in the NFL for anywhere from probably 1 to 3, maybe 4 seasons at the very most. And so you have to plan for the future if you're the Ravens, where if Campbell seems likely he's going to end his career in Baltimore, when that does happen, I think Butler is a player who can provide both some pass rushing presence as a defensive tackle, as well as the ability to stuff the run, and playing under a guy like Campbell who can give that experience and teach some of these guys. I mean, we've seen the videos of Bynes Campbell teaching up Justin Metabike, teaching up Broderick Washington, Jovan Swan, some of those defensive tackles, the young guys. That's what you want. That's what you want a young defensive tackle coming into, is a veteran leader who is would Matthew Butler play a lot in his first season outside of injuries? Maybe not, right? Maybe they wouldn't need him to because they'd have Campbell and Pierce and Metabike and Washington, etc. But if he had a dominant preseason and if he was showing those flashes, he could certainly get on the football field and be an option for the future. So I like him. He's able to lock up very well and just be able to stun some offensive linemen with his hands. So a lot of stuff that he does well, both in the run game and in the pass game as a pass rusher as well. And the Ravens, as we know, do need that interior pass rushing presence. And next at 128, I selected Cam Jurgens, a center out of Nebraska. Now, Jurgens, this is a center class where obviously Tyler Linderbaum is the top player in the class, right? He is by far and away the top, one of the better center prospects that a lot of people have seen in a while. I don't necessarily think investing in a center, in the center position in the first round at 14 at least, is the option I would want them to go. I think there are enough mid-round centers like Jurgens, Luke Fortner, Alec Lindstrom, Cole Strange, etc., who could be options for them while they get another position like a Kayvon Thibodeau or a Jermaine Johnson, etc., etc. And Jurgens is a player who did play at Nebraska. Nebraska is a school that plays a lot of good teams, and I know people are, now that we're starting to get into the, all right, we're 3 weeks away, 2 weeks away, etc., people are starting to look at the competitions and say, well, this guy played against this competition and this guy played against this competition, so I'm taking the guy who played against harder competition. And I get that. I understand it. But I think for Cam Jurgens, he is a player who is, again, a do-it-all center. Doesn't necessarily have to start right out of the gate. It seems like Passion McCarry is going to be that starting center. He can be a developmental guy behind McCarry and even Tristan Colon if that's the option the Ravens want to go with when the season starts. But it just feels like to me, and I'll say it, I've said it, I'll say it again, McCarry to me is at best, let me rephrase that. McCarry, in the best role, in my opinion, for him is the super sixth offensive lineman role. Now, that's not saying he can't be a really good center starting. I mean, he did have quality games playing starting center. People just look at that Buffalo game and say, well, the snap went over Lamar's head, da-da-da. McCarry can be a very solid center. But I think overall, if you can have a Jurgens or a Cologne even, and then you have McCarry as a super sub who can slot in and be that super sixth offensive lineman, that is my preferred role for him. But again, not saying he can't play center. So if you have a Jurgens who can provide that depth at the center position, definitely think that's a solid option for the Ravens. Then 141, Kyren Williams, running back from Notre Dame. Williams is on the smaller side, around 5'9", but is a lot to handle. Has great cutting ability, has some deceptive power as well for his size. Can be a great receiver out of the backfield as well. I mean, it's like the third down running back mold who can also take on some of the snaps that maybe J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards has to give up early because they're on the PUP list, or they just don't want to give him a lot of snaps. Baltimore doesn't. So I like the Kyren Williams pick. There are a lot of solid mid-round running backs in this draft, and I think Williams is definitely one of them. And finally, at 196, Chig Okonkwo, the tight end from Maryland, is the selection for me. And we've talked about Okonkwo very many times on this show. I've taken him a lot. I've been trying to kind of switch it up with the tight ends a little bit, but Okonkwo keeps falling. I think he's a very solid option as kind of the H-back-ish role. Very athletic pass catcher. Could use some work in the run game blocking, but I think as a third tight end, he could be a lot of what the Ravens are looking for. So overall, only 8 picks in this draft because I traded 3 for 1, the Ravens had 10 picks. And so trading 3 for 1 with that 2 difference means it's 8. Look at that math here on Locked On Ravens. But I think this is a good draft that hits on a lot of different needs. It's not necessarily reaching for any one of them. Yes, there could have been maybe an inside linebacker selected or another edge rusher or another defensive lineman. I get that. But with only 8 picks, you don't have as much flexibility with that, especially if you want to double dip at cornerback or offensive line, which I did. But I like the value I got, and I think the Ravens get out of this one with stars, depth, and contributors both in the now and in the future. But we'll head into our final break now. When we get back, we'll be diving into some mock drafts that we got from Twitter, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens, but first, let me tell you about Built Bar. And again, New Year's resolutions, people are giving up on them a lot nowadays, but don't do that this year. I'm sticking to my resolution. I hope you are too. And if yours is to eat right, do it with Built Bar. Built Bars are stuff. They have a lot of different stuff, including the Built Bar Puffs. And if you haven't tried those, you're really missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. The first ever protein-infused marshmallow. Yeah, protein-infused marshmallow. I never heard of them before, Built Bar, because obviously these are the first, and I highly recommend those as well. A ton of great flavors across the board for Built Bar, too. My favorite is mint brownie, but they also have coconut, almond. Most Built Bars do contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. So be sure to go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back. Our final segment here, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. We talked about my mock draft. Let's talk about your mock draft now. And again, I apologize if I don't get to yours today. We got a ton of submissions, and I love getting all these submissions. And if I don't read out yours here today, I'll be trying to get to it throughout the rest of the week here on the show. So be sure to stay tuned for the rest of those episodes. And also, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft, though, with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, as they bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast, just like Locked On Ravens. We will be back here tomorrow talking about more Ravens-related content. But all right, mock drafts from Twitter time. We're going to start off here with one from Be More Finest, who has the Ravens taking Jahan Dotson, wide receiver, number 14. Drake Jackson, edge, number 45. Cam Taylor-Britt, corner at 76. JoJo Doman, linebacker, 100. Isaiah Thomas, edge at 110. Matt Let's-Go, offensive tackle, 119. Cam Jurgens, center, 128. Kobe Bryant, corner, 139. John Ridgeway, interior defensive lineman, 141. Pierre Strong Jr., running back, at 196. This is an interesting one. Jahan Dotson, to me, well, first of all, first-round wide receiver, been slowly coming around on it a little bit. It's still not my favorite pick in the world if they were to do that. I think there are receivers that they could take in the middle rounds, like George Pickens in the second, for example. Or you could get a Pickens and pair him in the first round with Jermaine Johnson. Or if you really want to get crazy at 14, Trent McDuffie, although, again, I'm probably still trading back from McDuffie at that point. Dotson is not the highest receiver on my board. You know, Chris Olave, Drake London, et cetera, are guys who I have a little higher than him, Garrett Wilson, et cetera. But I think Dotson's a very phenomenal player. Dotson would be more of a second-round target for me, in my opinion. I don't hate him as a player. In fact, I really do like him. But I think 14 might be a little too early. So maybe this is like a trade-back situation again, where you're trading back, getting some more picks. But then you get into the middle rounds. Drake Jackson is a player who I think is starting to really climb up the draft boards. And he's a player who honestly could probably go in this range if you're the Ravens. So getting a player like Jackson at this point would be great. Cam Taylor-Britt, I talked about a little bit. I really like what he does. If you watch his film and his tape, his highlights, he stands out. He really does stand out. Then you get the linebacker at 100, doubling down on the edge there at 110, another double down at corner at 139. John Ridgeway is a player who I think is not getting enough love. Ridgeway, he was one of the best run stuffers in all of college football. And in the sixth round area is like crazy value for him. So I like John Ridgeway whenever he's taken one of these mock drafts kind of late. Talked about Cam Jurgens. Well, let's go is that offensive tackle depth we talked about, where I think is very important. The Ravens, in at least the first 4 rounds, get at least one offensive tackle. So overall, while the Dotson pick might be a tiny bit of a reach for me, I do like the rest of the depth, and one draft isn't defined by one pick. So I think Dotson's still a very talented player, but you get a lot of other talented players here in this mock draft from Be More Finest. So good job by Be More Finest in this one. Next, we'll take a look at a mock draft from Kalen Hutchinson, who has the Ravens taking Trent McDuffie, corner at 14. Just talked about that. We'll talk about that a little more. Logan Hall, edge at 45. Leo Chanel, linebacker, 76. Sam Williams, edge, 100. Matt Araiza, punter at 110. Oh, we got to talk about that one, too. Simon McCullum, corner, 119. Velus Jones Jr., 128 at the the wide receiver position. Sincere McCormick, running back at 139, Cam Jurgens, interior offensive lineman 141, and Marquise Bell, safety at 196. So people are on the Cam Jurgens wave for me today throughout these first two. I'm liking that. McDuffie at 14, again, I would not be upset if McDuffie was the pick at 14. I just think that you could be able to trade down to, let's say, 18 or 20 to get him. Now, in situations, I think McDuffie could just go earlier than that based off the fact that he is, in my opinion, the third best corner in this class. I think Booth is number 4 just because of injury issues, but talent-wise, you can kind of flip-flop him 3-4. But I think for McDuffie, if the Ravens decide that, yeah, look, corner is our biggest need, we have to take a corner at 14 regardless, and Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley are both gone, then I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens did make that pick and they didn't want to risk losing him if they traded down 4 picks, as maybe another team like the Eagles need a corner or the Saints, so you have to kind of weigh that risk. I like McDuffie as a player. Size, he's smaller, but still plays with a lot of heart and plays much bigger than his size. And then you have a lot of other guys here from Kalen. Sam Williams. I love Sam Williams as a prospect on the football field. He's great. Leo Chanel is, I think, one of the better inside linebackers in this class. Matt Araiza, 110. Man, I've seen the mock drafts with Matt Araiza at 196 and stuff. I don't think I've seen him taken at 110 before. Now, Araiza is the best punter in this class by far and is one of the better punters that has come out in a very long time into the NFL draft. And so, look, if the Ravens decide that they have to move on from Sam Cook to create some cap space, they want to have what could be a generational punter in Araiza, they could make the selection here. And so I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens took him. 110 might be a little early in my opinion, but we have seen crazier things happen before. Cough, cough, kicker in the second round by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple of seasons ago. But McCollum, I love. We talked about him. McCormick is a nice mid-round running back option. Marquise Bell at the safety position. I don't know if they're going to draft a safety as much as maybe sign an undrafted one, but regardless, I do like this draft. McDuffie, again, is more of a trade-down candidate, but again, it's not defined by one pick, by one player. It's not that I hate the pick, right? That's not what it is. So I like this mock draft from Kalen. And by the way, the combination McDuffie and McCollum at the cornerback position, that's a good duo, plus Hall and Williams on the defensive line. Yeah, I think you'll take that on defense every day of the week if you're the Ravens. But next here, our next mock draft comes from a guy who has the Ravens trading up to 11, trading 14 and 119 for 11 and taking George Karlaftis, the edge out of Purdue. Then another trade, the Jets receive Miles Boykin, 45, 110, and a 6th in 2023, and the Ravens get 35 and 111. The Ravens at 35 take Kyler Gordon, corner from Washington. Then another trade where the Ravens trade back, this time trading 76 to the 49ers for 93 and 105. Kellen Diesch, the tackle from Arizona State, is the pick at 93. Luke Fortner, center from Kentucky, is at 100. Zion McCollum, corner from Sam Houston State, is at 105. Neil Farrell Jr., defensive lineman from LSU, is at 111. DeMarco Jackson, Appalachian State linebacker, is at 128. Kevin Austin Jr., Notre Dame wide receiver, 139. Chig Okonkwo, tight end from Maryland, at 141. And Matt Araiza, San Diego State punter, is at 196. All right, trading up for George Karlaftis. Now, this is my third straight. This is a guy I'd trade back for candidate. Again, not saying I hate this selection, and Karlaftis honestly could be gone by this point if you have Thibodeau come off the board and Walker and Johnson and Hutchinson, obviously. If those 4 are gone, Karlaftis is the 5th best edge rusher in this class, in my opinion. And so if 4 edge rushers go off the board, I think Karlaftis could be gone by 14. I don't know if he necessarily will be. I don't know if this is a situation where the Ravens have to trade up for him. Maybe it is. Gordon is somebody I really like at the cornerback position, played at Washington, which is where Marcus Peters did play. They usually produce some solid corners from there. Diesch is that tackle depth we talked about. Fortner going back-to-back offensive line. I like that. Then you have the defensive line depth with Farrell Jr., another double down at corner with Gordon and McCollum. We talked about that double down with some of the 2nd and 4th round, or McCollum in the 3rd round in this situation. Guys, you get the wide receiver in the mid-rounds, which I do like. Okonkwo, I don't know why PFF gave this an F pick. I like that pick at 141. And then you have Matt Araiza, the punter, again, generational guy potentially, so you might have to take that risk and take him before another team can nab him. So good mock draft here from Makai. Again, more of a trade back candidate with Karlaftis, but I like Gordon, I like Diesch, Fortner, McCollum, DeMarco Jackson, Okonkwo. Those are all players that can really make a draft. And Karlaftis, he's not a bad player. He's not a bad player. So good mock draft here from Makai. And finally here, we'll take a mock draft from Michael Telford, who actually Michael and I talked on his podcast. When was it? It was a couple of years ago, previewing week 1. I see, I was on there with him. So memories. But he ends up trading down. I can't see the specs of the deal, but he ends up getting Devontae Wyatt, defensive tackle from Georgia at 32, then getting David Ajabo, edge from Michigan at 34, Roger McCreary at 45, the corner from Auburn, Nick Bonito, edge at 76 out of Oklahoma, Alec Lindstrom, Boston College, center at 100, Jake Ferguson, tight end at 110 from Wisconsin, Brian Robinson Jr., running back from Alabama at 119, Cole Strange, offensive lineman from Chattanooga, 128. John Ridgeway, defensive tackle from Arkansas, 139. Matt Araiza, there he is again, punter from San Diego State at 141. Man, this is a really nice mock draft, and part of the reason I really like it is because this isn't necessarily one that picks are being forced at, where you're trading down, you're getting value both for this season and in the future. We don't know what the timeline for David Ajabo's return is going to be from an injury, but getting him in the second round at 34, that's an investment on a player that if he was healthy, was likely going in the top 15 or the top 20 at the very latest. And so you're investing in that value for a player that I think has the potential to be very, very good coming off of that injury. Not to mention getting Wyatt at 32, where his range has been very all over the place in like the mid first, early second, it feels like, at least the mock drafts that I have seen. Maybe other people have seen different, but it feels like his value is all over the place. I have him as like a mid to late first round pick. So getting him at 32, which is the last pick in the first round, is a pretty good option if you're the Ravens. Roger McCreary, I've talked about Alec Lindstrom, Jake Ferguson before. I really like both of those guys as depth pieces. Ferguson, I think, would be a really nice third tight end complement to Nick Boyle and Mark Andrews. Brian Robinson, big hulking running back and can take snaps if, let's say, again, Dobbins or Edwards can't and just aren't ready to play or on the PUP list, etc. Cole Strange, I like a lot. Very versatile. Projects at center. It feels like that's where teams want him to play, but can also do a lot of stuff at guard if you need him to. But the Ravens, I think they're set at guard pretty much. Like maybe they'll bring in an undrafted guy, but regardless, John Ridgeway, we talked about. I like him a lot as a mid-round defensive line prospect, where if the Ravens don't invest in that position early because they re-signed Calais Campbell, that's awesome. But yeah, I think this is a great mock draft here from Michael, getting value in a trade down, value for this year, value for the future. That's what the Ravens want, and I think that's what they get here in this mock draft. But that's all I have for you today here on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to get back to tomorrow. We'll be diving into more Ravens talk, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.